So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm not sure whether I need to fight against any lunch coma, so I'm trying to be your double espresso. You need to tell me whether that works or not. So, I would like to tell you something about smart factories, connected pack, and beyond. I work with SIG, and just to start with, SIG is a company which actually produces complete systems for food and beverage packaging. And what that means is that on the one hand side, we produce the packing material itself, which typically consists of different layers of different materials. Simultaneously, we are an engineering company delivering the equipment, the filling equipment, which is at our customer site in order to produce the pack. In a nutshell, in case you have not heard about SIG, we're a mid-sized company based in Switzerland, about 1.7 billion euro revenue, which translates into about 1.9 billion US, about 5,000 employees. Our customers run a production volume of about 34 billion packs a year, which translates into roughly 100 million packs per day. So it's quite significant for our customers to keep production up, actually, as you can see. And we're operating globally, so 60 plus countries. So what I would like to go through with you in the next couple of minutes is actually to share some highlights of how our digital journey began 2 years ago. So I'd like to share with you how we structured our thoughts to come to a conclusion of where to begin and how to begin. Then I move forward in giving you a few examples of where we stand today. And last but not least, I'd like to share with you some thoughts on what we think lies ahead of us and what the next building blocks need to be. So let's start with the question, how should any company actually get started? Because there are so many options. You could think of so many different technologies. You could think of so many different use cases. So the way of how we approached it was actually pretty straightforward. So we decided to take a broad approach by starting with ideation. So we conducted in-house interviews. We brought external experts in and contemplated about how to do our business differently, how to disrupt, how to incrementally improve things, and so on. So we came up with about 180 ideas, which was clearly more than we could handle simultaneously. So the next process step then was to cluster those 180 ideas into meaningful, bigger clusters, each cluster consisting of ideas which had mutual relationships, where there were synergies, and where it would have made sense to start them all at the same time. So this gave us 17 clusters in essence. And then we looked at each of the clusters and applied a prioritization approach. We defined certain criteria, which then actually gave us a clear indication of what clusters to address first and what then to take as a next wave. And just to illustrate how we did the prioritization, you can have a look at that matrix. You see, in essence, two different axes. The one is the EBITDA, so financial impact, of course, does matter to everybody, I suppose. At the same time, the size of the bubbles you can see there indicate the growth potential that we saw within each cluster. And as we are aspiring for growth, that also was important and gave us an indication of how to prioritize. Last but not least, the operational view on it. So how difficult would it be? How easy would it be to implement? Was the third dimension along we judged on our priorities. So that actually represents of how we did the strategic roadmap for our digital journey. And on a very high level, it turned out that this defined our overall corporate agenda when it comes to digital. In essence, all of the things that we had thought of or that we wanted to roll out fall into one of two big buckets, actually. The one being the smart factory in green, and the other around a connected pack, a smart pack. Here you see in yellow. And we had initiatives that were dealing with innovation that we would bring in front of customers, whereas other parts of those clusters would address more things that of how we do things internally. So that's why there's a dark part and the light part in each of those boxes. On top of that, we have a number of initiatives which were mainly addressing the question of how we run business as a company, as an organization. So that's the blue, thinner box you can see in the middle. So that on a very high level actually defined our strategy. So we developed that about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, and it still holds true. So this obviously still is highly abstract, and it doesn't give a clear indication of what we're really doing. So let me move forward by giving you 2 examples, one out of the smart factory area and the other from the domain of the connected pack. So where are we today? Still, we feel that we are pretty much in our infancy, so that's why I picked this one. But at least that child's able to ride on a bike, so I'm not sure whether that's applicable to our business as well. But let's see. So first example, smart factory. I already highlighted the production volume and the importance for our customers to have a high technical availability all the time, and that's where maintenance service comes into play. So we, SIG, put heavy emphasis on servicing our machines at our customer sites. And we started with the vision that we could significantly and fundamentally enhance the servicing process by integrating 2 different parts. The one is, if you start with maintenance strategy, we envisioned a solution which would, through connecting it to appropriate software, would identify service events by itself, and would then hand over that information to the service world. So the software would automatically generate workforce tasks, would assign and schedule those tasks, and have the field service engineers execute them at the right point in time. And once the service engineer would have done the work and reported back to the system what the work was that he did, then this information would be used to eventually improve the maintenance strategy itself. So that's the vision that we had behind what we call the digitized service, the digital service. When we dived into that, it clearly became obvious that it was not as easy as shown in this diagram. Instead, it involved a lot of technology, which all needs to be integrated. So we decided to go with a strategic partner to jointly develop that. It turned out to be GD Digital, who has quite a few elements in place, actually, that we needed for the solution. And I'm lucky to say that actually these days we're running the first maintenance cycles with that integrated software. So our plan is to roll that out in the course of 2019, and by end of 2020, our plan is to have about 400 plus filling lines, filling machines equipped with that integrated software. So that's one example which plays in the area of smart factory. I'd also share with you another example which is at the other end of the spectrum. The connected pack, you may wonder, what is that? And it's actually an answer to the question that everybody could ask. I'm just going to skip that. You could ask it for yourself. What would you do if every single pack, if every product you would hold in your hand would have a unique digital identity? So what would be that good for? So we started asking ourselves that question, came up with a number of use cases, and started developing the technology behind, basically to enable packs to be really unique. So what we did is actually to develop serialization, printer technology, and different sensors that would allow to print unique code or put NFC on each single pack. And that would be the basis, the technological basis, to have a unique identity to every single pack. Yeah, so the solution we developed actually consists of a number of different modules. And those modules cover the necessary elements from production to distribution and retail, and even the elements to reach out to consumers. So, and depending on the use case that our customers, the brand owners, for example, would like to realize, you can configure those elements so that you end up with a track and trace solution, with a supply chain solution, or a solution that would engage end consumers to getting involved with the brand and the brand values more intensely. And just to pick one of those use cases to illustrate what I mean, we started piloting first use cases in the consumer space with some of our customers. So, for example, behind the code, there could be a raffle. Yeah, so every consumer would be encouraged to simply screen and to see, to engage in a raffle, or another flavor of that, run instant promotions. Yeah. Third example would be consumer brands could easily run loyalty programs, which are actually would be related to what's on the pack. So this is another example of how we see digitization in the digital journey. So in essence, how I see it, on the one hand side, it's about efficiency. Yeah, we're trying to give our customers and ourselves instruments that would enhance their way of how to operate their own business. That's Smart Factory. On the other hand, we're trying to reinvent a core product, digitizing the core product itself. So those are two very fundamentally different approaches. Obviously, we're hoping that both of them are going to work. But I wanted to show both because it simply shows the whole spectrum of what digitization of the digital transformation can really mean to a company like SIG. Okay, so let me end with a few remarks on what we see as next steps for us as a company and for the whole transformational journey. Obviously, there's a lot more in those big buckets, Smart Factory and Connected Pack. So we need to execute according to our program, which we set up a couple of years ago, 2 years ago. But on top of this, I think it's not good enough to constantly think about new business models and introducing new technology. Ultimately, it's about changing the way of how you do business. It's had been said quite often, but I think it applies to everybody, so it's worthwhile mentioning again. The cultural transformation is a building block of every digital transformation. So what we started right now is actually to implement change management. It's obvious that digitization means more change in the future to come. Probably digital is all about flexibility. I mean, change will become faster and faster. So we as a company need to learn how to become more adaptive to change. We also need to learn of how to experiment with data more. Like many other companies, I suppose, SIG has a tradition of 80 plus years. It's not the most experimental company. Yeah, on the other hand side, understanding what data means to you requires that you're open-minded and that you start looking into data from different angles, try out things, fail fast if necessary, and do all this. Yeah, so this is a huge transformation in terms of how people think about running their daily operations and how to run your business. The other aspect I'd like to mention is that when you start generating a lot of data, when you start implementing new software, it's important to think about the proper foundation. And with respect to that, one of our building blocks here is to make sure that the data lakes that we're generating are interconnected, or that we're talking about a single lake. And that lake or those interconnected lakes serve not just single company functions, but that those data are accessible to everybody, that they're being used on a cross-functional basis, and thereby actually learn of how to enhance our business. So these are just two aspects. Probably there are many more to come. But I think, I hope that you gain some insight of how we think about the digital journey. And with that, I thank you and hand over to Greg again.